Hello, my friends. The time has finally come. You've been asking for this introduction to JavaScript for a while now. I was teasing a playlist, but this intro is basically a playlist in and of itself. I've put a lot of effort into it. By the end of it, you should feel much more confident in your coding skills. You will have written many lines of code. And yeah, this is a JavaScript tutorial that I wish I had 10 years ago when I wrote my first line of code. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. So welcome back to the channel. My name is Devlin Peck, and over the past 10 years, I've been using JavaScript on everything from personal projects, portfolio websites, client projects, and even internal tools for my team to make our lives easier. So I've done quite a bit of work with JavaScript. There's never been an easier time to learn it because of AI tools and AI assistants now. We're going to get into all of that. But my main goals with this video are to show you what JavaScript is capable of, introduce you to the syntax so that you know what you're actually looking at, and then most importantly, help you develop a conceptual understanding of like how JavaScript can actually make your life easier, how it works behind the scenes, so that then you can use AI tools or do some additional research to kind of fill in any gaps. And then I'm also going to show you a little bit about how to use JavaScript with Storyline. So I'll show you a full overview here. So we'll get started with JavaScript where you will write your first line of code. Then I'm going to get into syntax, variables, and data types. We're going to cover functions, conditionals, and controlling the logic flow. We'll of course talk about JavaScript in Storyline, since I know that many of you are using Storyline most likely, or other e-learning authoring tools. We'll cover how to work with API so that you can bring external data and services into your e-learning courses, and I'll give you an intro to how that all works. We'll cover some JavaScript libraries too to set the foundation for future videos that will get a bit more advanced. And then, of course, I'll talk about how you can use AI tools to make your JavaScript development experience a bit easier. So, why JavaScript? What's the point? I think the most appealing part of it for many of us in the instructional design space is that we can enhance our e-learning with much more advanced functionality. So what a lot of you are probably interested in is integrating AI chatbots into your Storyline courses, for example, or generating AI-powered feedback so that users can get this dynamic, personalized feedback based on their performance, and use these AI talking head custom avatars that can speak directly to your user. So I want to tease this project. It's still under development. Sabrina is working on it. But here's a polished, production-ready example of a secure AI integration in a Storyline course. So we have a video going live next week. We're going to dive into it. But I want to show you that this is like all dynamic. So this is all AI generated, this Linda response we're getting. Let's see. There we go. So that's AI generated, and we're in this AI role-playing scenario inside of a Storyline course. We also have this AI mentor who can give us help on the fly, which is also AI generated. So this is the kind of thing that's possible with JavaScript. It really extends the capabilities of computers, essentially. And also lets you use fewer triggers and develop way faster. So if you have a complex Storyline scenario and you don't want to build out 1,000 triggers, you can write a dozen lines of JavaScript and get it done way faster. You can also track e-learning interactions much more granularly, like if you want to know what buttons your users are clicking or what they're entering into open response questions, you can do that with XAPI, which you have full power over when you know some JavaScript. You can generate personalized user content too. So you can send customized emails. You can generate slides or quizzes on the fly based on how your user is performing. And you could take things even further, right? Like you could create real-time multiplayer e-learning games within Storyline where two users can connect with each other and face off on a quiz, for example. You could do some 3D VR interactions with some JavaScript libraries. So possibilities are endless here. You're essentially future-proofing your skill set so that you can design some really custom e-learning experiences and unlock the power of AI, right? Like that's what has made me much more excited about JavaScript these days. Is AI is moving so fast, and when you know JavaScript, you are in control of what it can do. So I hope that's intriguing enough. I also want to mention here that it is a journey. So you're probably going to feel overwhelmed, like you're learning a new language here. So think back to the last time you were learning a new language. right? It feels pretty intimidating, right? Like if I were to go and look at like Mandarin Chinese right now, I wouldn't know where to start. But there have been times I felt like that about Spanish or about French or Italian, or even in my Shakespeare class in college when I'm trying to read some Shakespeare and I'm like, what is going on here? But then by the end of the semester, kind of breezing through it. JavaScript is a lot like that. That's what the experience was like for me learning to code. It feels completely impossible at first, but then with a week of practice and you're writing some lines of code on your own without referencing something, it feels very addicting and rewarding. So learning JavaScript is just like that. It's like reading another language because it is another language. The good news here is you don't need to know how to speak it or understand it. It's all written. So easier than a spoken language. So this video requires no background knowledge about JavaScript. I will probably assume a little bit of background knowledge about storylines since most of y'all are looking for some more advanced development at this point. And I just want to emphasize this, you do not need to memorize everything. So professional developers feel intimidated by new libraries and they're often constantly looking things up, right? So there's no expectation that you need to have all of this JavaScript knowledge in your head. You just need to know conceptually what's going on, understand the syntax a little bit, and you'll get better and better as you go. Okay, so this video I already know is going to be quite long because we're covering a lot of ground. You're going to get a lot of practice. You're going to write many lines of JavaScript. I have a lot of good challenges for you. So you're probably going to want to come back to this video as needed. So you may want to bookmark it. It will be worth it if you do get all the value out of this video that I share with you. And I also have some practice files for you. So I'm going to include a link to that in the description. It has 17 homework assignments that should be pretty easy to do as long as you're following along with the video. And it has like hundreds of lines of code. It's all of the code examples we're going to cover in this video. So if I were brand new to JavaScript, I would probably try to watch this video through once to just kind of get a grasp of what I'm talking about, try to understand the concepts. And then I would watch it a second time and try to actually complete all of the homework challenges in the practice file as you go. I think you might have a lot more success that way and feel a lot less overwhelmed. Well, again, just to clarify, you probably will feel overwhelmed by some of these concepts at first watch through, but second watch through, it might start making a lot more sense. And also let's set some realistic expectations here. Like you're not going to be a professional at the end. You're not going to memorize all the code you need, but you should at least feel proud of yourself and feel like you can celebrate these small wins that you're writing some code, you know how this works, you know what the whole point of it is, and you'll be able to ask some really good questions either to me or to an AI assistant that I'll introduce you to shortly. All right, so moving right along, what even is JavaScript? It was created in 1995 to make websites interactive. That's the main idea. Like if you ever look up like a mortgage calculator or loan interest type calculators or anything like that, where it's like a little interactive web tool or like an interactive or a word counter where you can paste in a bunch of words and it tells you how many characters and words it is. That's kind of what JavaScript was initially created for, to power web tools like that. So it was initially designed to run inside of your browsers. So browsers like Chrome, Edge, Firefox, all of that, they have these built-in JavaScript engines that can parse the JavaScript and make it do stuff inside the browser. We've come a long way since then, and now it can actually run on servers and it can run on your desktop computer and it can do pretty much anything that any other coding languages can do. We'll cover more about how that's possible later. And a big disclaimer, this is not related to Java. So I can't tell you how many times I talk to people and I'm like, oh yeah, do you know any JavaScript? It's really powerful for extending the capabilities of Storyline. And they're like, oh no, yeah, I used to study Java back in college, but it's completely different. They're not related at all. So JavaScript and Java are two totally different programming languages. All right, so let's get you all set up to follow along here. So first thing you're going to want to do is get a code editor. So Visual Studio Code is the most popular one. I will be using Cursor in this video just because that's what I use for my personal coding projects. As you can see here, Cursor is basically Visual Studio Code. It's exactly the same, except it has this AI chat window built in, and it lets you like automatically update your code based on the AI based on what the AI wants to do. So if you're intimidated by and I also pay $20 a month for this one for like extended capabilities. So it's free to start, but if you just want to get started, download Visual Studio Code. This one is completely free. It will look exactly the same as Cursor, which I'm using in this video. So download one of those, pause the video if you don't have it already, but it just makes it way easier to use a code editor like this. So here's Cursor. You can see it kind of like color code stuff for you. It'll tell you if there are errors. It'll do little marks like this. Some of these errors are intentional here, but you're definitely going to want to use a code editor. So go ahead and do that, and then get the practice files. So I have the link in the comments or in the description. Just go ahead and click on that. We'll email you all the files you need. And again, it includes all the code, the storyline practice file, all the homework assignments. So you're really going to want to grab that. So maybe pause the video, get that process started so that when you're ready to dive in, you'll have it. Over here, so when you open up Visual Studio Code, let's see, I'll do new window. You'll see something like this, and then you can open a project. So you'll do open project, and then you can just create a new folder called like my project or however you want to title it. We'll open that. And then you'll see a window like this. You can right click over here beneath my project and click new file. You could click this button, and then you'll want to have a file that ends in .js to tell your computer that it's a JavaScript file. So whenever you're starting a new project, that's how you would create a JavaScript file. I'm going to close this window because I have this big practice file for us to work through here. So when you download this JavaScript file, you can just right click it and do open with Visual Studio Code if that's the editor you downloaded. So once you got the practice file open, you've got in Visual Studio Code or Cursor, you'll be ready to go there. I also want to introduce you to your AI assistant. Now, Claude Sonnet 3.7 is the best AI model on the market right now for coding. I recommend always having it open in your browser. So you can go over to claude.ai/new. That's what this will look like once you're logged in. And again, I actually, in the practice file, I included the prompt I use. So you're a professional software engineering coach and you specialize in helping beginners learn JavaScript. I need help, and then doing whatever it is you want to do here. So I recommend getting this open just because if you are confused about anything in this video, you have this on-demand assistant ready to help you out. I use this as I was creating this video. I use this whenever I'm doing any coding. Like I said, these days it's so easy. So yeah, start getting some practice using this ASAP. You can start for free. I pay $20 a month for it. I think if you are serious about learning to code, that's the best investment you can probably make right now. So yeah, use Claude 3.7. It's definitely worth your time. And then like I was also saying, if you do use Cursor, you can have Claude right here in your sidebar. Whoops. So you could have Claude right here. You can pick your model that you want to use. You'll have to add an API key. It's a little more advanced. I could do a video about it if you want. But yeah, as long as you have it open in your browser, you'll be good to go. So you've got your code editor open. You've got your AI assistant ready. Now I want to introduce you to the console. So open a browser. You probably already have your browser open because you've got Claude open. And then you can either use one of these shortcuts that you see right here, depending on whether you're using Mac or Windows and whether or not your function keys are set up to work like they should. Or you can right click somewhere empty on a web page and click inspect and then console. So I'm going to go here. So I'm going to right click this and then you see that inspect option. Sometimes it doesn't work. Like if you right click on the wrong thing, you won't see the inspect option. So sometimes you might need to play around with it. So you'll click inspect and then you can click on console. So this is the JavaScript console. Again, if you're on Mac, you can just do Command Option J. So this is JavaScript console. I want you to write your first line of code. So you can do console.log, and then you're going to open a parentheses, and you're going to type in hello world, enclosed by some quotation marks. And then you can close your parentheses and press enter. And then it just logged to your console, hello world. So I'll explain more about how this works and what happened here a little bit later on. This will make a lot more sense to you by the end of this video. But let's jump back over to the PowerPoint. You use the console for debugging, testing, etc. So in your code, you can say like console.log and then like the name of a variable you want to use, and it will send that data to your console so that you can make sure it is what it's supposed to be. So it's essentially a useful debugging tool. And here's what that code looks like bigger since it was pretty small when I typed it, but you're going to do console.log, open parentheses, and then inside of some quotation marks, put the text you want it to say, and then close your parentheses. So congrats. Once you've done that, you've written your first line of JavaScript. So you're well on your way to being a JavaScript developer here. So pause the video if you want to try that. It's, a good hurdle to get over writing that first line of code. And let's talk a little bit about the syntax now so you know what's going on. So JavaScript is case sensitive. So I would suggest, just as a general rule, use lowercase when it comes to all of like the JavaScript keywords and whatnot. If you use uppercase, it's probably not going to work how you expect it to. And I'm going to show you examples of all of this soon. JavaScript instructions or statements generally end with semicolons. You don't really need to do that these days. Like modern JavaScript adds the semicolons for you, but sometimes that can lead to some weird errors or bugs. So if you remember to try to use semicolons at the end of each statement, I'll show you what that looks like soon. I personally generally don't, and I had to like go back in the practice file and add them all, so I'm like following best practice. And then you can also add comments. So you'll see in the practice file soon what this looks like. I just want to have this. You'll notice as you go through this video, I'll have these slides up as like quick references, but I'm going to go way deeper into things and explain it much more clearly in the practice file. So I want to bring up the bullet points first, and then we'll jump to the practice file to make things actually make sense. And then also you should know that JavaScript ignores extra spaces and line breaks, so you can format your code however you want. So as you can see here in the practice file, all of this like green text here with the double forward slashes to start off the line, these are comments. So JavaScript isn't actually going to read or do anything to this line once we started off with these slashes. Same here. So as long as I don't press enter, if I were to like press enter to create a line break, oh, it automatically did it for me. But yeah, this is for single line comments. So even though the word wrap makes it span a second line, it's still just one line of code. So I have a lot of these comments throughout the practice file to help share information with you and like share instructions and tips to make things easier. As you can see here, this is where we talk about logging information to the console, right? That's the line of code we used. But I also emphasize that JavaScript is case sensitive. So if you were to have a capital C console.log, this would not work. So case sensitive, but yeah, white space, right? We could add a bunch of line breaks, doesn't impact anything. We don't want to add spaces between stuff like this, of course, but hopefully that is self-explanatory. We talked about the comments a little bit. These double forward slashes make everything you put on that line a comment, but you can also create multi-line comments. Like if I do want to press enter between, different lines and comment out like entire blocks of code, I can use a forward slash and an asterisk, and then an asterisk followed by a forward slash to end the multi-line comment. So here's another way we could write it just to make it nice and clear. So there we go. That's a multi-line comment. Let's get into some data types, right? It's going to get a little bit juicier here now. This is a core. You got to understand this before we can get into the good stuff. And I want to acknowledge this video might be a little bit boring. It might be a little bit, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you can power through and understand the basics, then you can get into the more fun and exciting use cases. So you gotta trudge through the beginning stages where you're like, why do I need to know this? How does it make sense? How is it actually going to benefit me? Trust me, you need the foundations of the language to do the exciting stuff. So the first data type are strings. There's also numbers, booleans, which are true or false, arrays, objects, and then some other ones that we'll talk about too. But yeah, let's dive over to the practice file. That's where things get better. So strings are any combo of characters representing text. So they can be enclosed by single quotes, double quotes, or backticks, as long as you're consistent with how you're like starting and ending this string. So you can see here we have some text. I am a string. We have some text here created. This string is being created with single quotes or like apostrophes, whatever you want to call them. And then also backticks. So this one's created with backticks. Notice that this is important because it has a quote inside of it. Okay, so if we're creating the string with backticks or single quotes, then we can still use double quotes within this string. So that's why we have some flexibility. If we need to use one of these symbols inside of the string, we don't want to use that symbol to create the string. And here's an example of that. So notice I use double quotes to start the string, but then I'm trying to include a quote within the string. What this essentially does is tell this string, okay, you end once you see that second double quote. So the string ends here. This DON is just hanging out, not in a string or anything. It's doing nothing. Then we have a single quote apostrophe, which tries to start a new string. And it just gets all messed up, as you can see here. So hopefully that's clear. And then here's another example. If you use an apostrophe or a single quote to start the string, you want to be wary of using an apostrophe within the string because that just ends the string. But yeah, you can include numbers, symbols, text, spaces, whatever you want inside of these strings. As we'll see later, if you want it to be a multi-line string, like if you want to add line breaks within it, you will need to use backticks to create the string. So again, this is going to be a lot of information at once. If you ever feel confused, feel free to pause, rewind, ask AI for follow-up if you want, but you don't need to 100% follow every single thing I'm saying. I'm just going to throw a lot your way. And then I added this backtick just to end the string, just to like not mess up my whole code file. Because if I add that, actually, I'm just going to not mess with it. So yeah, so your first homework assignment there is to fix these strings above so that there's nothing hanging out outside of them. So you want to use the right quotation mark or backtick or single quote to start the string and end the string without anything being left on its own. So feel free to try that as you go, to do the homeworks as you go, or to save them for the end. You can go back through them all. Numbers are the second data type. Pretty self-explanatory. You can include numbers. They can be negative. They can have decimals. They are not enclosed in any kind of quotes. Just the strings are. So numbers don't need to be enclosed in anything. Oh, whoops. Booleans. So these are equal to true or false. So it's like, does the data exist? True for yes, false for no. And then if you've used Storyline, you know that this is a type of variable, a true-false variable. It's also called a Boolean in JavaScript. These also are not enclosed by any quotes. Now, arrays are collections of data. So if you want to have like a list of things, like a grocery list, and you want to have all those things on there, you can enclose them in square brackets. So if you wanted to create a new array, you could create those square brackets, and then you could start listing stuff like kale and eggs, and we'll do some oat milk. Accidentally pressed enter there. So as you can see, we can add these strings, and then we add a comma after whatever the data is. You can see here, we don't need to have quotes around everything. If it's a Boolean or a number, we don't add those quotes. So we will keep it moving here. Let's get into objects. So these are really powerful. We're going to get way deeper into them a little bit later, but these are collections of key value pairs enclosed by curly brackets. So we create the object by opening that curly bracket, and then we can have a key. So like name, for example, and we set it equal to something using a colon. So we're going to say name is equal to this string Devlin, and then we add a comma. And then age is equal to this number 30, and then comma, and then role is equal to this string instructional designer. We don't need to add a comma after this one because there are no more key value pairs after it. And then we end it with this curly bracket. So again, if this is new to you for the first time, you don't need to memorize all of this right now. You're going to get a lot more practice with this. It's saying that these are some errors because we don't have this object set to a variable. So later when we cover variables, if you want to fix these errors in the file, you can come back and set it equal to one, but we're going to save that for a little bit later. And then finally, there are a couple more data types like undefined, for example. If we were to create a variable but not set it equal to any data, it would be undefined. And then if we want to create a variable but set it equal to essentially like nothing, or it be some like placeholder or null, we could set it equal to null. We don't need to know too much about that right now. I just want you to know that these other data types are out there. There are some other more advanced ones that I've never even had to use before. But yeah, these are the main ones. So arrays and objects can be a little bit more confusing, but we will get more practice with them. Strings, numbers, and Booleans are hopefully quite simple and straightforward. The most confusing thing about strings is just how to use those quotation marks appropriately. All right, now let's dive into variables. Variables are fun. So again, if you've used variables in Storyline, it's very similar. You're going to create a variable to hold some kind of data so that then you can access that data or reuse that data by just typing the name of the variable. So we use the keyword let to create variables that might change in the future, and the keyword const for variables that do not. You might see in older JavaScript examples, people use the var keyword, VAR. That's kind of out of date. We don't want to use that anymore. So whenever you create a new variable, you're going to use either let or const. And we'll see examples of that in the code shortly. Oh, or here's an example right here, actually. So const name is equal to this string Devlin. Then if I want to use that name later on in the code, I can just type in name and it will be equal to that Devlin string. So easy ways to reuse some code. And then age, we're going to let age equal 30. So since age might change, right, we can add to age, we can set it equal to something different. Whereas once we set a variable with the const keyword, we can't change it. So if later on I want to say, oh, name equals Schmevlin, it would throw an error. But if I wanted to later on say age equals 35, it would let me do that. You also want to use meaningful variable names so that your code is more readable. And then you use camel case capitalization, which looks like this. So the first word in the variable is lowercase, and then you capitalize the first letter of each ensuing word after the first one. So there's some examples, and then we'll cover template literals. So let's dive back into the practice file. So again, const, and then whatever we want the variable to be called, in this case it's name, and then an equal sign, and then whatever data you want to set that variable equal to. So again, here's that example in the code, let, and then age equal 30. So in objects, we're using these little colons to set these properties equal to their values, but variables always use the equal sign. So then if you want to access that variable, you can just write its name without any quotes or brackets or anything like that. Like this. So if we want to log 30 in this case, we would do console.log, and then it would set our console.log age inside of the parentheses, and then in the console it would say 30. I want to show you an example here. So I'm going to grab this code. I'm going to go over here to this console we were using, and in the console I'm going to set this variable. So I'm going to say, okay, age is equal to 30. I'm going to press enter, and then I'm going to do console.log age to access that variable. And then as you can see, it logged 30. So it took the value of that variable and then spit it out for us in the console. So if you want to test things out in the console as we go here and see how things work and just change it up, feel free to do that. Keep in mind that, here, let me zoom in a little bit. That should be easier. And also when you open your console, you might see some errors and warnings and stuff up here. Those are for whatever website you're on. You don't need to worry about that. And yeah, you can use it like a little playground. I'll show you another example here while we're at it. So constant name equals Devlin. And now if I want to say name equals Schmevlin, you can see that's an error. We're trying to assign a constant variable. You can't do that. But if I say age equals 31, you can see now age. So whenever I enter age, it'll give me 31. So there's an actual example of how the variables work here. And then keep in mind, variables are case sensitive. So if I wanted to do age, that's nothing. So capitalization is important here. Here's the camel case example. So we're going to capitalize the N in name, since that's the second word. Favorite programming language, we're capitalizing the P and the L. So there we go. Here these examples are around updating the variables, right? As long as we define it with let, we're letting it change. If we're defining it with const, we're saying, no, this is a constant. The variable cannot change. Now, here's a weird little format that actually is a really nice addition to JavaScript. So JavaScript has developed a lot over the years. Over time, the new things have been built into modern JavaScript that just make developers' lives easier. So you might see terms like, this is like ES6. That's just like a JavaScript update that came out somewhere along the way. So this here, it's called a template literal. So it's a really helpful format for including the value of variables within a string. So we're creating a variable called message, and we're creating this template literal with backticks. So we start with a backtick, and we say my name is, and if we want to embed the value of a variable, we do it with a $, and then curly brackets, and then the name of the variable within it. And then after that we say, and I am, and then 30, right? This is going to be equal to 30 in this string because we're taking the value of it, years old. And then we end it with a backtick. So if we weren't using backticks here, it wouldn't work. We can't use single or double quotes with these template literals. So you might see this example a lot in code that you're working with or AI generated code. Just know it's an easy way to create a string that includes the value of these variables within it. The way to do this before was with concatenation, and you had to use plus signs, and it was really not pretty to work with. This is a lot easier and better. So here you go. You've got another homework assignment. Create a few variables, my name, my age, and my favorite food, and then create this message using a template literal. So go ahead and try that now. If you want, you could also write a line of code that logs the message to the console. So you can apply everything we just covered here. Again, if you feel comfortable with it, I recommend you do it just so you can stay engaged and actually build your confidence a little bit doing this stuff. Cool. All right, I'm going to hop back into the PowerPoint here. So now we're going to cover operations. So JavaScript is a programming language, so you can make these different calculations happen. You can do these different comparisons. So right, we can add, subtract, multiply, divide, get the remainder. There are even more of these we could use. And then we can compare values. So we can see if values are equal to each other, not equal to each other, greater than, equal to, all that good stuff. Then there are these logical operations. So we can say like this and this, both of them need to be true for that to be true. We could say like if this is true or this is true, then the whole thing will return true. Again, I'll show you some more detailed examples. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. These are useful for calculating things and creating conditionals, which we will of course cover later. So operations are easy enough. All right, if x is equal to 5 and y is equal to 1, then x plus y will be equal to 6, right? We're just doing some simple addition. You can also use parentheses if you want to separate things out for the order of operations. So x plus y, for example, is going to be equal to 6, and then we can multiply it by 2. That will give us 12. So nice and easy. Homework here, write a line of code that uses the x and y we've already created and make it return 30. So use the operations, make it equal up to 30. Do it a few different ways if you want to get some practice. And then you could test it in the console if you want by, pasting this line in there and then pasting your lines of code in there one at a time. When you add strings to each other, they get concatenated or essentially like tacked on to whatever you're adding them to. So notice how 5 plus 1 as numbers is equal to 6. If you add the string 5 to the string 1, it's going to be equal to 51. It's basically just saying add this onto whatever this is. So I hope that's clear enough. You shouldn't have to do this yourself too often, especially now that we have template literals to add variables within strings. Here's a little operator plus plus that adds a 1 to the variable, or minus minus subtracts 1 from the variable. So say we create this new number and make it equal to 0. Then we can, with this line of code, we're going to say, hey, take new number and then add 1 to it. And now new number will be equal to 1. And then we could say take new number and subtract 1 from it with this little shorthand, and it will be equal to 0 again. So you'll see this especially when we get into working with loops. So we'll cover that later, but I just want you to know what's going on here. It's just a shorthand way to basically say new num equals new num plus 1, right? Instead of having to write that all out, that little shortcut makes it easier for us. You can use plus equal to add whatever's on the right side of the equal sign to the left side of the equal sign. So let's see, we created this my score variable equal to 0, and then we can say my score plus equal 5, and it will add 5 to whatever the value was. So it will be equal to 5 now. Then we can make it equal to 0 by using minus equal 5. You could do the same thing with multiplication, division, all the other operations too. So just shorthand ways to do these operations here. All right, how we doing? I hope y'all are following along here. Drop a comment. Let me know where you're at with all this stuff. But we're going to dive into comparisons now. So we want to compare values. We can check if they're equal with this double equal sign. So the single equal sign is reserved for assigning values, right? So like my score equals 0, we're assigning it equal to the value of 0. But with double equal signs, we're going to check if values are equal to each other. And I'll talk about the difference between double and triple equal signs too. So we're gonna create this correct answer variable and set it equal to 5. And then we'll create this user answer variable and set it equal to 5 as a string. So here's where the double and triple equal signs differ. So we're gonna evaluate this. So we're gonna say is correct answer equal to user answer, and this is going to return either true or false. So in this case, it's going to return true because with the double equal sign, it doesn't care what type the data is in. It's going to try to convert, if they're different types, the double equal sign will try to convert them into the same type first. So in this case, it's going to say, okay, hey, 5 as a number is different than 5 as a string. Let's convert 5 as a string into a number and then check if they're equal. So it will return true because once that string is converted to a number, they will be true. They'll be exactly the same. But if you use a triple equal sign, that enforces type also. So it says, are these equal in type? And if they are equal in type, are they equal in value? So this would fail that check because 5 as a string is different than 5 as a number. They're not the same type, so they can't be equal. So there might be some niche cases where that's important. I just want to introduce you to both of those. Again, you could always look it up or use AI for help if you need to. But yeah, that's what those symbols do there. And then this is important too. You can check if two values are not equal by adding an exclamation point in front of the equal sign. So we don't need to use the double and triple equals here for checking if they're not equal because this isn't reserved by anything else, right? The single equal sign is already reserved. An exclamation point and an equal sign just means, hey, are these not equal to each other? So in this case, 5, we're checking if that's not equal to 5. Doesn't matter what the type is, that's going to be false because they are equal. And then similarly, if we want to make sure that the type is enforced, this one would return true because it's going to say, oh yeah, 5 number is not equal to 5 as a string. So yeah, this is true. And this gets a little bit confusing when we do the inversions, right? If you know, feel free to pause the video if you really want to understand and follow this, but you know, I can already tell I'm being confusing. I get confused myself when I'm dealing with the inversion. It's like, okay, these are not equal, so this is true. Yeah, it can be headache inducing sometimes, but that's okay. As long as you follow along with the symbol, generally what the symbol means, I think you're in good shape. And then you can use these different comparison operators too. So like 3 is less than 4, this will return true. If we're checking it with the conditional, because 3 is indeed less than 4. If we want to check whether 5 is greater than or equal to 10, this will return false. 5 less than or equal to 10 will return true, right? This is like bringing us back to like what elementary or middle school math class. So yeah, that should be straightforward enough. We can do all of that fun stuff in JavaScript, and it will be very useful with if statements, which we'll get to later in the video. Let me check back in the PowerPoint, make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. No, I'm not. Okay, so it seems like I still want to make sure you know what's going on with this exclamation point. This will come up with in your code, and if you don't know what's going on with it, especially with AI generated code, you're gonna feel pretty confused. So we're gonna create this dummy variable, but not set it equal to anything. So this is gonna be undefined right now, right? We're not saying equals hi, it's equal to nothing. We're just saying, let this variable be. So now if we check this, it's gonna say, does this dummy variable not exist? Right? It's going to check how truthy this statement is. Right? So dummy variable will be false because it's undefined. So we're going to say if there's no dummy variable, this will return true because dummy variable, sorry, I used to have that called something different, is not set to any value. Undefined is not considered a value. So if you want to learn more about this, you can look up like the truthiness or falsiness of different JavaScript expressions or statements. Again, this might be a little confusing right now, but this is a common check if we want to see if some data exists. So we might say, yeah, we want to get some data back from the server, and we'll say like if exclamation point data, like return, like end the function. Might sound confusing right now, but this will make more sense in the future. Another example, dummy variable equals 30, and then we check and say, hey, does this dummy variable like not exist? This will return false because it is actually set to a value. So I'm sure I could have explained that better, but bear with me here. We're gonna get to the good stuff a bit later. And now, yeah, these are important to these different operators. So we can check if multiple values exist or are present by using these different operators. So this double ampersand sign wants to make sure that both of these variables equate to true. This one will be false because funny variable is undefined. Even though dummy variable is defined, funny variable is not. This operator wants to make sure that each, and we can add more, right? We could keep going. Whoops. Honey variable, right? But this approach makes sure, it says this expression will return false unless every single thing it evaluates is true. And then this one is the or operator. So as long as one of these expressions evaluates to true, the whole thing will evaluate to true. So like, you know, when I used to study for the LSAT, I thought I wanted to go to law school. Like if you've ever done any kind of logic training or practice, this is probably pretty intuitive to you. If not, it might be confusing. That's okay. You don't need to fully understand this right now to use JavaScript. But we can say and or. So as long as, yeah, hopefully that's clear enough. And here's a way to get some practice. So create 3 new variables, course 1, course 2, and course 3. Leave course 3 undefined. So just do like let course 3, and then don't set it equal to anything. And then write 2 statements that include all 3 of the variables. The first statement should use the AND operator and return false. The second should use the OR operator and return true. So you're going to be practicing with these operators a little bit. All right, I hope you're still hanging in there with me, because now we're moving on to arrays. So these are created with square brackets. So we're going to say, well, yeah, there's an example. We'll save the examples for when we get into the code file. And then we can access items in the array with the square brackets too. We can check the length of the arrays, we can add items to the array, and we can remove items from the array. They can also hold mixed data types. So let's see an example here. So I'm going to create this new variable called available courses. I'm going to set it equal to this array of different course names. Each of them are a string, and they're each separated by commas. We've covered that already. This is nothing new. What you should know, though, is that arrays are 0 indexed. So the first item in the array has this 0 position. The second item in the array has the 1 position, and so on and so forth. So if you want to grab the first value from this array, which would be this introduction to JavaScript, you would type the name of the variable, available courses, and then you would use this square bracket notation, the same square brackets you used to create the array, and then you enter the number of the position of the item you want to retrieve. So since it starts at 0, entering 0 here would get the first value from the array, as you can see here. You could check the array's total length with array.length. So the array in this case is available courses. That's the variable that holds that array. So you would just type in available courses.length, and it would return 3. So it would let us know there are 3 total items in this array. So the homework for you is to write a line of code that returns the introduction to instructional design string from the array. So try to use this approach, but use the right number within those brackets to grab that data. So there are also a whole bunch of array methods you can use. So one of them is the .push method. So you can, enter the name of your array, do .push, and then within the parentheses, you can put whatever data you want to add to the array. So in this case, we're going to add this storyline 360 fundamentals string. This will push it on into the 4th position. Well, this will be the 4th item in the array, which would be at the 3 position again, because they are 0 indexed. So that makes sense. And then you can remove the last item from an array with the .pop method. So you do the name of the array, which is the variable we set it to, and then we do .pop with those parentheses, and nothing needs to go inside of the parentheses. So this would remove the course that we just added in this line of code. So those are just a couple, .push and .pop. There are a bunch more. You can look them up if you're interested. And also notice we set the name of this array, we set this variable with const. So we said, hey, this is an unchanging variable, and it will always be equal to this array, but that doesn't mean that the stuff inside of the array can't change, right? So it holds a permanent reference to this array, but the array is still mutable. It can still get stuff added to it or removed to it. So something to keep in mind with the const keyword. All right, so here's your homework. Write 3 lines of code to add 3 new courses to the available courses array. So push them on there 1 course at a time, just to get some practice there. Name the courses whatever you'd like. This one's a little bit more advanced. I just want to kind of tease what some of these more advanced array methods look like. So we could take available courses and we could say for each item in this available courses array, we're going to perform some kind of function on it. So we're going to cover functions later, but we're going to say we'll call each one of these items a course, and then for each course, we're going to do a console.log, and we're going to say available course and then the name of the course. So again, you don't need to understand this right now. You will understand this function syntax by the end of this video. But what this does is it basically cycles through each one of these courses, and it logs it to the console. So it will say available course Introduction to JavaScript, available course AI for Instructional Designers, and it will keep going as long as there are more items in the array for it to run that on. So there are more of these like map, filter, find. Again, you could look up those if you want to. I just want you to know that they're out there. You could do some really cool stuff with data in arrays, and you'll definitely be working with arrays when you get data back from APIs, and some of those more advanced things we'll cover later. All right, so next up we have objects. Now objects are great. Objects are what make JavaScript so powerful. So objects are created with curly braces, so not the square brackets, but the curly braces. Again, they're those key value pairs, and then we can access the properties quite easily. Again, I'm just gonna pull this all up as like a quick reference, and then we're gonna dive into the practice file. Okay, so here is a JavaScript object. We're calling it intro course, so we're creating a variable, and we're setting it equal to an object. We know it's an object because we're using this curly brace right here. And then we are giving these different key value pairs. So name is the key, introduction in JavaScript is the value, and it's a string. And then we have to add a comma. So again, we use colons here to set these key value pairs. So credits, we're setting equal to 3, which is a number, so it doesn't need quotes. Add a comma. Topics is equal to an array. So right, we can make these properties equal to other arrays or other objects. It can all be nested. The topics, it's this array of different topics that are covered in the course. Of course, can't forget that comma. And then this description is a string, and we don't need a comma at the end. So here's an object, right? And here's why right? It helps organize information. So if we want to pull information about our intro course, like we do here, we can just do intro course dot name. So we can use this dot notation. If we want to grab the first topic that's covered, we can do intro course dot topics. So it accesses this topics property, and it's an array. So how do we access the first item in an array? We have to add that 0 inside of those square brackets. So if we were to run this code, it would return JavaScript fundamentals. So objects are just a really helpful way to store data, and then we can access that data. We can update values also using dot notation. So intro course dot name equals JavaScript 101, right? So that will then that will access this intro course object, and it will change the name from intro to JavaScript to this new value that we set it to. So similar to how we set variables, we can also set these properties using this format. I didn't show an example here too, but you could create new properties. Create a new property on the object like this, and we can just do intro course dot student count. So you could just do dot notation. You can name the property whatever you want and set it equal to something. And we can say, yeah, it has 1,500 students. And so then it will add a new thing to this object. So if we were to call if we were to say, okay, give us intro course, it will return the whole object, and it will have a new key value pair on it called student count equal to 1,500. So feel free to play around with that if you want, but again, a really helpful, useful data structure. Yeah, objects are great. So another way to access the value of these different key value pairs is to use bracket notation. So intro course, and then within these square brackets, credits within quotes will return 3. So you don't ever need to do this. Dot notation is like so much cleaner and easier, but there are some cases where you will need to use brackets instead of dot notation. I'm not going to cover them here because you're probably not going to run into them very much, but just know that this is another way to access that data. And then, yeah, you can nest objects within objects. So here's an example: student details, name, Devlin, address. We're going to set it equal to this object, which again is just enclosed by curly brackets, and then has these key value pairs separated by colons. And then, if you're adding more than one key value pair, you need to make sure you have a comma after it. So I hope you can get some practice with this. I hope you're starting to recognize this format. You're noticing the nesting. Here's some homework for you to really try it out. So create an object in a MyDetails variable and include your name, your age, your address, which will include a nested object like in this example where it's all separated out. And then also include your hobbies, which would be an array of strings. So like reading, writing, so on and so forth. If you want to really test yourself with this and make sure you're comfortable with it, you can include a family details nested object that includes details about your family members. So this is just a way to practice with deeper nesting if you want, but try to do this part first. And once you do that, this one might seem a lot more attainable. right. Again, let me know how you're feeling about objects at this point. If you want to drop a comment and let me know if this is feeling overwhelming or not. Yeah, I'm curious because I know this is overwhelming for me when I first learned about it, but now it's like one of my favorite parts about working with JavaScript. And then, yeah, here's the quick reference bullet points if you want to see those. Let's move on to JSON. So JSON is JavaScript Object Notation. That's what it stands for. It's a standard format for exchanging data between different servers and services, I guess you should say. It's similar to JavaScript objects, but it's stricter. You can't have nested objects, for example. You can't have functions. Actually, you might be able to have nested objects. I'm not too sure about that. Don't quote me on that piece. You probably can actually, but yeah, it's basically a JavaScript object enclosed in a string. So you know what a string is now, right? It's enclosed by quotes. It's treated as text. The reason for this is because it's better and easier to send strings or text across the web than it is to send like raw JavaScript objects. So we have some little tools we can use, some methods like JSON.stringify and where's the other one? JSON.parse to convert JavaScript objects to JSON and then to convert JSON back into a JavaScript object. So there's some built-in tools in the console that can do this for us. We don't have to always do it ourselves. But I do want to show you what this looks like. So here is a JSON object. So notice it's a string. We have some backticks here because it's a multi-line string because I wanted to keep it formatted nicely for you so you could see what's going on here. And then notice that the key names are enclosed by double quotes. So this is a requirement of JSON. This is why it's more strict. Again, you're not really ever going to have to write stuff in JSON because you can write a little bit of code that does it for you, which I'll show you soon. So there we go. I have some more notes here if you want to read them, but you can easily convert a JavaScript object into JSON with this JSON.stringify method, and then you can convert it back into a JavaScript object with JSON.parse, right? So we're going to say, hey, turn this object into a nice string so we can send it to a server. And then if we get something back from a server, we're going to say, hey, we want to work with this with JavaScript. So we want to parse this back into JavaScript so we can work with it with that nice dot notation like we were doing up here, right? So here's this at play. So we have school info. This is a JSON object because it's enclosed by one string. It has a double quotes. But if we want to turn this into a JavaScript object, we can create a new variable and we'll use this JSON.parse command. And then within the parentheses, we will put the variable that we want to parse back into a JavaScript object, which in this case is school info. So this would parse it out. And it would give us a nice JavaScript object. So then we could do like parse schoolinfo.schoolname and it would give us Peck Academy. If we try to do schoolinfo.schoolname, it wouldn't give us anything because this is treated as one big string, just as if it were one big block of text, not as an object. I hope that's clear. And then we could turn it back into a string with, again, JSON school info. So we're going to take, we're going to create a new variable called JSON school info. And we are going to use this JSON.stringify command to take this variable, which again would be a JavaScript object now, and we're going to turn it back into a string. We're stringifying it. This was really confusing to me at first. I was like, what is the point of this? But you will see this a lot when you're working with data, when you're sending data to servers and receiving data from servers. And that's the direction we probably want to go here. I mean, that's where you really unlock the power of some of this stuff. So I want to lay some of that groundwork and explain this to you in a way where you can like conceptually understand what's happening, right? So here is some homework. So create a JavaScript object called favorite things. Give it a few properties like favorite book, favorite movie, favorite season, and then create a JSON favorite things variable and make it convert your favorite things object into JSON. And then you can create another final favorite things variable and convert it back into a JavaScript object. So similar to what I did up here, just get some practice doing it on your own so that you know how to use these different commands. Okay, we got functions up next. So functions are juicy. So functions are good. Functions are reusable blocks of code that perform specific actions. They can accept inputs, which are called parameters. And since these inputs may vary and you want to be able to reuse the code. So that's a big feature of functions. You want to make them reusable. It can return you some data or some values based on those inputs. And these are the building blocks for all JavaScript programs. So if you want to build any kind of complex program, you're going to have a lot of functions at play. So we're going to look at some different syntax that you can use to create functions. Some are a bit more easy to read, and some are a bit more concise. So let's take a look at the practice file here. So here's how you define a function generally. So use this function keyword. This is reserved by JavaScript. Then you name the function whatever you want. In this case, we're calling it function name, and we want to use camel case for functions too. And then inside of these parentheses, we would include any parameters we want to include, if any, right? And you'll see what that means shortly. And then your code would go between these curly brackets. So that's the function format. You don't need to memorize this right now. You'll get used to it more as you see it more often. And I explain that again here. Here's a simple function example that prints hello world to the console. So we'll say function log to console. We're not going to pass it any arguments. We're not going to use any parameters right now. We'll cover that later. So we just leave nothing between those parentheses. We open up the curly brackets so that we can have our code we want to execute whenever we call this function. And then we'll write console.log hello world. So once we've defined that function, we can call it really easily. We just do the function name and then the parentheses and any parameters if we included any, which in this case we didn't. So we just do a log to console with those parentheses and nothing between them. And then whenever we call this, it would print hello world to the console. So I'll show you an example. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go over here to this console we're using. So I defined the function here. It says undefined because it's not actually returning anything. It's just holding this in memory so that we can use it when we want. And now I can do log to console, parentheses, and then there we go. It prints hello world. So now we have a function that can do it, that can print to the console for us. If we want to return data though, instead of just have our function do something like use this console.log method, we have to use the return keyword. So here's an example. Whenever we call this function, it's going to return the number 5. Pretty useful or useless, I should say. We're never going to, we would never use this in production. But if we didn't have the return keyword here, this would do nothing. This function just wouldn't work. So again, I'll show you this at play 2. We'll create that function, and now I'll call the function. Oh, return 5. And then it gives us back 5. So there we go. Let's cover parameters now, because this is where functions get a bit more useful because it lets us pass data into them. So parameters are inputs that the function needs to do its job. You could think of them like function-specific variables. So here we go. We're going to create this new function called add5, and we're going to pass it a number. So right here, it's called a parameter, but when we actually pass in a value, it's called an argument. So I'll show you that soon. So yeah, this takes a number parameter, and then inside of the code, we're going to return the number plus 5. So what this function does is it adds 5 to whatever number we include inside of those parentheses. And you see, we can name this whatever we want. So we call it number, we could call it num, we could call it n, as long as we then reference it using the same way that we defined it. That's just how functions work. So I'll show you this one at play 2. So we'll paste it over here. We've defined it. Now I can do add 5, and then I can add like 20 inside of the parentheses, and then it will return 25. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, that's the code example. We can name the parameters whatever we want, right? We just covered that. We can also have multiple parameters. So this is useful to know too. So we can define this new function called add numbers, and we can pass it num1 and num2. And then we'll return num1 plus num2. So you see how we do that? We'll paste that in here, and then we'll do add numbers. We'll do 2 and 3. And then it returns 5 because it takes 2 and it sets it to this little temporary num1 variable essentially, and then 3, which sets it equal to that num2 variable, and then return num1 plus num2. It's returning 2 plus 3. So I hope that's clear. Again, we can name those parameters whatever we want. It won't impact things. Like we could still create a variable out here called like let num1 equal 50. And it won't impact this function. That's because of scoping, which we will cover shortly. So there we go. Here's an example of using that function to add 30 to 50. I mentioned this a little bit, but when we pass the data into these parameters, they're called arguments. So I don't want you to be confused by that language. So in this example right here, where we're doing add numbers 30, 50, we're passing 2 arguments, 30 and 50, into the add numbers function. So when we create the function, we're defining it with these two parameters. When we're passing the data into the function, they're called arguments. So it's just a semantics thing that, you should be comfortable with and know what it's talking about when it's like pass these arguments into this function, or, the first argument should include so on and so forth. It's just talking about what we're passing into the parameters. All right, so here is some homework for you. Create a function called print user details that accepts two parameters, user name and user age. The function should log to the console an introduction stating the user's name and age, like, hi, I'm Devlin, I'm 30 years old, for example. Then call the function 3 different times, each time using a different name and age. So there we go. So get some practice reusing those functions in different ways. Okay, so now I'm going to show you something called arrow functions. So these are nice. It makes your code a lot cleaner. You essentially create a variable, then set it equal to your parameters within parentheses. And then you use this equal sign and this right facing caret here, this greater than sign. And then you can put your code inside of curly brackets. So here's an example. We're going to create this add 20 function like this. We're going to use the equal sign. We're going to take this number. We're going to set this number parameter. We're going to use that special syntax I showed you, open up our code block with this curly brace, and then we're going to return number plus 20. So that's another way to write a function. Now, if we did add 20 and then 5 in parentheses, it would be equal to 25. You could also make these even cleaner. So if you're just doing a simple one-line function, you can actually do it like this. So you can do const add 50 equal, this number parameter, the same symbol, and just number plus 50. So when we do it this way all on one line, we don't need the return keyword and we don't need the curly braces. So you might run into this. I just wanted to show you that this is an option. And then here's a little homework assignment for you. Write a one-line arrow function called multiply me that takes two numbers and multiplies them by each other, returning the result. Keep your code as concise as possible. So yeah, you can always use the bigger approach, but with more modern JavaScript, especially JavaScript that AI might come up with for you, you'll definitely see this more concise syntax more often. Okay, yeah, like in that for each code example earlier, if you want to go look at it, in that array method, we used an arrow function. It might make more sense to you now that we covered this. Okay, so I want to talk about properties and methods, just to, again, have a common language that we can talk about JavaScript stuff with. So objects can have properties, which are the key value pairs, and methods, which are functions. So objects can hold functions within them. When this is the case, it's called a method. So for example, in console.log, console is an object, and log is a method that belongs to it. So we're basically using this console object that the browser makes available to us, and then the browser already has some kind of code that logs stuff to the console. We can access it by doing .log and then using those parentheses. So let's dive into the code here. Yeah, so here are the oh, whoops, I clicked something random again. Okay, so yeah, we have this my object here, and then here are the properties, right? It has a name property, an age property, a favorite hobby property. These are all properties here, but we can also add functions. So I'm going to take this my object here. I'm going to add this print name function. So I'm just going to do .print name to create a new key on this object. I'm going to set it equal to a function. And then within the curly brackets, I'll make it say console.log, and then I'm going to use a template literal here, or a template string, whatever they're called. And I'm going to say my name is, and then we're using this new syntax too, this dot name. So the this keyword in this case just refers to this object, and it's going to take the name value of this object that it's on. So I explained this code in this block. It looks confusing. We accessed the myObject. We created a new method called printMyName. We set it equal to a function that logs the name property of the object, which would be right here. The this keyword can be confusing. We're not going to get too deep into it. But yeah, I explained some more details there. Not so important right now. Just know also if this function, if we define this with an arrow function, the this keyword will be treated differently, I'm pretty sure. That's still confusing to me. And again, you don't need to know the ins and outs of the this keyword to use JavaScript. So yeah, now, again, and here's an example of what the object would look like now. It would have this printMyName function. So it would look like that because we added it using this line of code right here. So yeah, so that's called a method, right? It's a function on an object. We can call it a method of the myObject property. And then we can call it in the similar array, my object.print my name. I asked if it reminds you of anything. I kind of already gave it away. Yeah, it's similar to console.log. And I explain that again in this text right here. So here's some homework. Create an object called a book collection that includes an owner property, a books array that includes a few books, and an add book method that takes a book name as an argument and adds the book to the books array. So this one, if you can get this should be quite rewarding. This will be a really good way to bring together a lot of the stuff you've been learning. I definitely suggest taking the time and trying to do this homework here. And remember, if any of the homeworks feel like kind of overwhelming, but you really want to get them, go over to that Claude chat, talk to Claude and ask it to help you with it. So you'll learn potentially more from AI than you do from what I'm talking to you about here. But again, I'm just trying to give you the conceptual understanding, the challenges, so that you can work with AI to fill in the gaps that you need to fill in. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about scope. So this can be quite important and confusing if you have no idea about it. That's why I want to make sure we cover it in the intro video. So variables declared inside of a function are only accessible within that function. And again, it's a little bit more complex than that, but for our intents and purposes here, that's all you got to know. Variables declared outside of those functions or outside of code blocks can be accessed by any function in that same file. So it's about the global scope versus local scopes. And then I would just suggest, using these modern keywords let and const to define your variables. They were introduced because of the var keyword had some looser scoping specifications. So that's why we kind of moved on from the var keyword. Okay. So here's a global variable, right? You can access this variable within functions or at the root level of the file. Okay, so we could always call this, but we can also create variables within the functions. So for example, we're going to create this return number function, and we're going to set a variable inside of this function. So we're going to say the number to return is equal to 25, and then we're going to return that number. Nice and easy. When we call this function, it's just going to return the number 25. Not really useful. All right. But if we try to log this variable outside of that function like this, console.log number to return, it's going to give us an error because this variable is not defined at the global scope. It would have to be out here for us to call it like that. So that's an example of where scope can kind of mess you up if you're not sure what you're dealing with. But you can then reuse the number to return variable in other functions. Wait a minute. Oh yeah, I see what I'm saying. So like if we set that variable here, we could also set that variable again here, and they have nothing to do with each other, right? So we can use the same name in different functions, and because it's a local variable, that name isn't reserved outside of that function. So that's how we can use really simple naming, like number, for example, in the example earlier. Let me just scroll up. Oh yeah, like this. Right? Like you want to use these nice descriptive words for your parameters because it's not, we could do const add 25 equals number, right? We could use that same term and it's not going to cause us any issues. Number plus 25 because it's a different function. It has a different scope, right? It's probably clear enough at this point. All right, let's jump back down here. So we can reuse those. There will be no errors. You can redefine variables within functions that have already been declared at the global scope too. So we're going to create this dev's name variable, set it equal to Devlin, but then within this function, we're going to set a new dev's name variable and make it equal to Devlin Peck. When we console.log this, it's going to log the one that's in the local scope. So it checks the local scope first, and if this weren't here, then it would log Devlin because then it would check the global scope. It'd say, okay, dev's name isn't defined in this function, but it is defined globally, so let's pull it from here. But when we have this line of code, it says, okay, nope, we've got it locally. We don't need to look any further. So it kind of works its way up with those variables. So there we go. Let's see. Yeah, that's that example I just showed you. Oh, okay, we're getting into conditionals next. So conditionals are really fun too. So these are good. These are really important for controlling the flow of logic in your code. How they work is they check the truthiness of a statement and then they proceed accordingly. So kind of like all those expressions earlier. If we look up here, when we were like, where were we doing that? When we were like, oh yeah, this would be equal to true. Oh yeah, here. So like 3 is less than 4. This returns true. we're checking the truthiness of this expression. So 5 greater than or equal to 10, not true, that would return false. So that becomes really useful when we get into these conditionals. Let's see. So here's the general format. Obviously, it will be easier to see in the code editor when we jump over there in a second. We could say if this expression is true, we're going to execute this block of code, or else we're going to execute this other block of code. We can also use else if statements in case we want to check multiple conditions if the first one isn't true. And then there's another shorthand, more modern ternary operator that lets us write these if statements much more simply. So we're going to take a look at all of that. So here's the format. If whatever is in between these parentheses is true, it's going to execute this code between these two curly blocks, or else it's going to execute whatever code is between these two other curly braces. So here's an example with some actual like data or code. We're going to let the current user be equal to Devlin. So we created a variable instead of equal to a string that has the text Devlin in it. After that, we're going to run a conditional check. So we're going to say if the current user is equal to Devlin, we're going to execute some code. We're going to console.log, this is Devlin. Or else we're going to execute this other code, console.log, this is not Devlin. So you can see I left some comments to kind of explain what's going on as we go. And then, yeah, sometimes there will be multiple conditionals you want to check. So we can use the else if keyword between if and else. So we're going to let current score equal 80. If current score is equal to 100, we're going to console.log, congratulations, you got a perfect score. Or else if the current score is greater than or equal to 80, we're going to console.log, congratulations, you pass. So notice that else if keyword. So if, first it's going to check if this is true. If that's not true, it's going to go on to this next one and say, okay, well, if this is true, then we'll do this. And still, if that's not true, then it will use this final code block for else, and it will console.log, uh-oh, you did not pass, try again. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's how these if statements work. It lets you execute conditional code based on some expression you want to evaluate within these parentheses. So this will be a good thing to get some practice with. I'll also show you the ternary operator. So this makes it even more concise. It's good if you want to do some really simple checks. So here is how it works. This is the format. So there's going to be some condition to evaluate before a question mark. So it's going to basically be like, is this condition true? Question mark. If so, this is what we're going to make happen. And if not, with this colon, this is what we're going to make happen. So it's not very intuitive, but it is very concise. Like, it's not the most readable thing if you don't know what you're looking at, which is why I'm introducing it here, because I don't want you to get some AI generated code that looks like this and you'd be like, what in the world is going on? So we're going to create a perfect score variable. And here's the condition. So we're going to say current score is equal to 100. This is the expression we're evaluating. If that's true, then we're going to return true. And if that's false, then we're going to return false, right? So perfect score is true if you get 100. It's false if you don't get 100. Here's another example that uses else if statements, essentially like multiple colons to keep checking expressions. So we're going to say user grade. Here's the expression we're evaluating. Current score is greater than or equal to 90. If that's so, then you're going to get an A. Or else, if current score is greater than or equal to 80, you're going to get a B. So notice how we did that. Or else, if current score is greater than or equal to 70, we're going to get a C. And then or else, you're going to get an F. So we kind of keep using that question mark and colon combo to set these different values. Now, that approach might be really confusing at first. It probably will be. I still get confused a little bit when I see that. I have to kind of go really slow and be like, what's actually being evaluated here? Again, I just want to show you what this is doing generally in case you come across it in the wild. You don't need to be able to write this like from memory by any means, but it is pretty satisfying when you write them well because it is so concise and pretty compared to having to write out all these lines. So here's some homework. Create a new JavaScript object called myCourseDetails and give it 3 properties: name, duration, and description. Then create an if statement that logs this course is ready for production if the name, duration, and description are all set, and have it log that it's not ready for production if any of those details are not set. Don't forget about dot notation and the and operator. So again, we're pulling some stuff together that we've learned a bit earlier in this lesson, but you should be able to do this quite well, I think. All right, I'm going to show you some different approaches to control the logic flow. You don't need to, oh, actually for loops are really useful, but let's go to switch statements first. So these are useful for checking multiple conditions against a single value when you already know like what those conditions might be. It's cleaner than if-else statements. Let's take a look. So we're going to let day equal Monday, and here's the switch statement. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to use a switch statement here. We're going to be checking this day variable. And here's the code block. So it's one big block. And then we're going to check these different cases. So in the case that it's equal to Monday, we're going to log start of the work week. And then we're going to break. This break is really important because if we don't break, it's just going to keep running the code in the rest of this code block. And we don't want that to happen. In the case that it's equal to Friday, we're going to log almost weekend. And then we're going to break. And then by default, if those ones don't get satisfied first, we're just going to console.log it's another day. So I don't use these very much, but again, sometimes you'll see this in AI generated code. Just know it's, check in this value against some potential predefined values. It's another way to do if then statements pretty much, but I like if statements better. Or sorry, if else, not if then. Don't forget to use the breaks, and then some quick easy homework. What would be logged to the console if a day were equal to Tuesday? That's a little test for you, but you don't have to practice writing switch statements. Again, I don't think I've ever written one from scratch. Okay, another way to control the flow of logic is with loops. Now, loops are quite common and popular. So it's a way to iterate for a known number of repetitions, and these for loops have 3 parts. So again, you'll definitely run into these in the wild. These are quite common. So here's how you create them. So you use the for keyword, and then within parentheses, you're going to pass in 3 different pieces of information. It's kind of confusing because they're separated by semicolons instead of by commas. That's just how for loops work. And at first, we're going to initialize a variable. Okay. After that, we're going to say how long we want this loop to run. So we're going to say let I equal to 0. We want this loop to keep running as long as I is less than 5. And after each time the loop is run, we want to add 1 to I. So here's that shorthand to add 1 to a variable. Okay, so that's what's going on here, right? We're saying I is equal to 0. We want the loop to run as long as it's less than 5, and we want to add 1 each time we go through it. So we're essentially going to run this loop 5 times. And then the inside the curly braces is the code that we want to actually execute while this loop is running. So we're going to do console.log I. So in this case, it's going to say, it's going to log 0. Yeah, here's how it's going to work. It's going to start at 0. It's going to be initialized. It's going to console.log 0. And then once it ends for the first time, it's going to add 1 to I. So then I will be equal to 1. The code will run the next time, and then it will log 1 to the console. And it will keep going until I is equal to 5, and then it will stop because 5 is not less than 5. So let me show you what this looks like if we actually execute it. So I'm going to paste this loop right here. It's going to start the loop immediately, and then it's going to start logging the numbers. Well, it did it quite fast, as you can see. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So since we started at 0, we don't ever actually get to 5 because this 0 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it prints it 5 times, but it only makes it up to 4 because we started at 0. So that's how loops work. Really useful for looping over data that we might get back from an API request. Like I said, you'll definitely see this format, so you want to get comfy with it. While loops are another type of loop. I don't think you need to know this one as well as for loops. Again, it's a little confusing, but they always kind of look like this, right? It's always going to be set to 0 to start. You're going to say how many times you want it to run with this piece, and you're always going to want to increment I to make sure that it's actually you're actually keeping track of how many times it has been run. So looks a little confusing at first, but it looks the same every time you see it, at least to get it set up. Okay, so for while loops, we're going to create a count variable and set it equal to 0, and then we're just going to use the while keyword. So while count is less than 5, we're going to execute the code within these brackets. So we have to we'll console.log the count, but we have to manually increment count instead of using a fancy little predefined approach here. So again, just want to let you know that this exists. It's another type of loop, but you don't really have to create, I would suggest using for loops most of the time, unless you really need a while loop. Okay, so speaking of which, let's do some homework. So create a for loop with a conditional inside of it. It should start at 0 and log to the console, I am less than 3 when the value is less than 3, and it should log I am greater than 3 when its value is greater than 3. It should stop after 6 runs. So instead of just logging I, you're going to have to use some conditional logic, some of those if statements that you learned about, to only log either this or this, and it should log 6 times. So go ahead and give that a try. All right, so now we're getting into some good stuff. We're getting into JavaScript in Storyline. So it's going to get a little bit more practical here. You're going to start seeing how this can come to life and let you do some more advanced development practices. So as you probably know by now, JavaScript extends Storyline's capabilities. You can read and set Storyline variables using JavaScript. And it also allows you to bring in external APIs and external data sources into Storyline. So for example, like OpenAI APIs, it's how we make these AI-driven feedback bots or role-playing scenarios. You could do personalized weather or date information based on where the user is located. You could bring in custom animation libraries to do some animation that would not be that's way more advanced than what Storyline makes available to you. It basically unlocks the power of the user's browser and computer within the Storyline course. So let's take a look at how to actually do it. So the first piece you need to know is using this GetPlayer method. So let's let you access Storyline's other two methods, which are quite straightforward. GetVar, and then the name of the variable in Storyline between some quotes, that gets the value of a Storyline variable. So say you have like a text box in Storyline where the user can enter their name and it's set equal to like a username variable. You could do getPlayer.getVar username within some quotes, and it will take that user's name and bring it into the JavaScript for you so that you can, do some JavaScript programming with it. And then the other method here is SetVar. So you put the name of the Storyline variable that you want to set within some quotes as the first argument you're passing to it, and then you put the value that you want to set it to as the second argument. So I'll obviously show you some examples here, but this is the process that you use to communicate from your code to Storyline and from Storyline back to your code. So let's dive in here. All right, so a common development pattern here is to set a player variable equal to this getPlayer function, so that then you can do stuff like player.getVar and player.setVar like you see down here. That's not always necessary. So as you can see in the code example here, player.getVar is the same as saying getPlayer with those parentheses .getVar. It does the same thing, but if you're going to be accessing that getPlayer function quite a bit, you can set a player variable. So that's what we did here. Now, we're going to have this Storyline variable called quiz score, and we can get it. We're going to create a JavaScript variable called current quiz score. We're going to set it equal to player.getVar and then quiz score within those quotes. So that's going to take the quiz score variable from Storyline and set it equal to this JavaScript variable. A common thing to do here with this also is like if the user enters their name in a Storyline course, you can grab it with some JavaScript so you can do stuff with it in the code. That's very common too with like XAPI stuff if you get into that. I have some really old playlists on that will make a lot more sense to you once you've gone through this video. So here's how you could set variables too. So you could do player.setVar, the name of the variable in Storyline within quotes separated by a comma, and then the value you want to set it to. The thing to be careful with setting these variables in Storyline is you want to make sure the value you're setting it to works with the type of variable it is. So if it's a true or false variable, make sure you're setting it equal to either true or false with no quotes. If it's a text variable, make sure whatever you're setting it to is enclosed in some kind of quotation marks to make it a string. And if it's a number variable, you can just include it like a number, like you see here. So that's going to depend on what type of variable it is in Storyline. So here we go. We're going to go to Storyline and create some buttons. One that sets the quiz score to 100 and another that sets the quiz score to 0. So we could definitely just do this with like a adjust variable trigger, but we're trying to learn some JavaScript, so we're not going to do that. So here is this pass button. We're going to execute some JavaScript, and we're going to do GetPlayer.SetVar. Again, capitalization is important, capital S, capital V here. And then again, the name of the variable we want to set, and then we're going to set it equal to 100. We could do like const player equals get player and then do player.setVar, but that's less concise in this case, since this is just treated as its own individual function. So yeah, we don't need to set a variable here. We're not going to be able to access a variable in this execute JavaScript trigger from another execute JavaScript trigger. So there we go. I'll click OK here. And I also want to point out I already have this quiz score number variable that's set equal to 0 by default. And then in the fail button, we're going to execute basically the same JavaScript as we do with the pass button, and we're setting the score equal to 0. So now when we preview this, if I click on this one, notice that the score is going to be set to 100. And when I click on this one, it sets the score back to 0. So it's doing it with JavaScript. We're adjusting that storyline variable. My homework for you with this is to adjust these execute JavaScript triggers so that when the user score is 100, it sets the storyline feedback text variable equal to a congratulations message. And when the score is less than 100 or 0, it sets it to an encouraging try again message. So here is that feedback text placeholder. You can see here, and here's how I do it. Like you probably know this by now, but you do a little percentage sign, then the name of the variable, and then the percentage sign, and then it turns into a variable reference like that. So there we go. Yeah, just adjust these triggers, these execute JavaScript triggers, adjust the code in here so that it updates that message using JavaScript. Okay, so let's hop over into our file here. Before we move into working with APIs, I want to talk about some of the different options we have for using JavaScript in Storyline. We've just looked at this first one so far, which is using these execute JavaScript triggers. But again, the shortcoming of that is each execute JavaScript trigger is its own standalone thing. You can't execute anything from another execute JavaScript trigger. The second option here is to use an external scripts.javascript file, or you could really call it whatever you want as long as it ends in that .js extension, and then you could link to it from your story.html file. So that lets you have a whole big code file like this. You could define some functions, some variables in the global scope, and then within your within Storyline, you could access those functions by saying like my function, whatever you want to do. So you could keep these JavaScript triggers nice and concise while keeping like your library of code and your library of functions all in their own file. So that is another way to do it. And then the third way, which is my favorite, but it's the most confusing, is to add all of the code that you would typically include in your scripts.javascript file. You can actually add it to the window object of the browser itself from the slide master base layer. So the benefit of this is every time you publish your project with the second approach, you have to drag in your scripts.javascript file. You have to edit the story.html file to link to it. Whereas with this one, every time you publish, the code is already there. I'm not going to go too in-depth into that here because this video is already long enough. But if you want a deep dive into like working with JavaScript in Storyline, we can definitely get way deeper on what we can do with that. But let's talk about working with APIs. This is like the big payoff. This has been the most exciting thing for me this year, is like working with APIs and server-side programming and all of that good stuff. But APIs are essentially how different software systems or different computers talk to each other. So I've talked about this in a previous video, the client-server model. So the browser is the client, and it requests data from a server, which is another computer somewhere else, basically, that it can respond with the data we want from it. So we do this communication using HTTP requests. It sounds confusing at first, but it's actually quite simple and easy. Yeah, it's not too complex once you actually wrap your head around it. I can definitely do a deeper dive video into HTTP requests if you would all like. I've gotten a lot better with working with them this year, whereas they used to be quite intimidating. But two of the most common ones are a GET request and a POST request. A GET request is us trying to get some data from a server, and a POST request is us sending some data to a server. And no matter what kind of request we're using, we're gonna get some kind of response from the server with data that we may want to do stuff with. So the APIs are like restaurant menus. They tell you what you can order and how to order it. So whenever you're working with a new API, you want to look at its documentation. So documentation will be really confusing at first. Hopefully it makes more sense to you now. This is that really basic cat fact API documentation where it tells you the URL to use. You can pass in a max length parameter to limit the length of the return fact that it gives you, and it shows you what that response might look like. So this is really basic. If you go to something like OpenAI's documentation, it will be way more complex and probably a bit more overwhelming, but yeah, you still might be able to make some sense of it. And yeah, we can use all sorts of different APIs. So you could do a Google search and just Google like different public APIs that are available to you. You could get random quotes. You could get the weather based on like a user's zip code or IP address potentially. You could connect with all these different AI services. So you really unlock the power of the web when you can work with APIs more comfortably. So the fetch API is something that is built into modern browsers that you can use with JavaScript, and it's a really easy way to make HTTP requests. So you could think of it almost like a messenger service that's already built into JavaScript and makes your life a lot easier. It's going to look a little bit confusing at first. That's okay. We're going to look at these .then chains, and we're going to cover a little bit about what it means to be asynchronous. So HTTP requests are asynchronous because when we want to send a request to another server and then wait to get some data back, it's not going to be instantaneous. It might look instantaneous to the human eye, but as far as the code is concerned, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take either some milliseconds to get that data back, right? It needs to still make its way to the other computer and then back to us. So that's why it's asynchronous, and we have to treat asynchronous code a little bit differently. So I'm going to go back into our code file, and yeah, we're going to work with APIs within Storyline. So this paragraph explains what I was just talking about. The server takes a little bit of time to process our request. And while it's processing that request, JavaScript returns a promise object. Again, it sounds confusing, but it essentially makes a promise to us that something is going to happen once that data is done processing. So how the code works that we're about to look at, the fetch method, it waits for that promise to resolve, and then we can do something else using the .then method. So I'm going to jump down here. So we're fetching this catfact.ninja/fact URL. Okay, so we're saying first send a request to this URL. And we know we want to go to that URL because of the documentation. So we use the base URL here that you can see up in my address bar. And then we do this /fact endpoint. So this is called an API endpoint. We and other computers are able to send requests to it to get data back. So that's the URL we're going to use. There is an optional second argument here, which is an object that includes a bunch of options for this fetch request. We're not going to get into that in this video. Again, it's optional, but it is quite important if you start using more complex APIs where you need to send like API keys and maybe send post requests or different types of requests. But again, we're not going to get too deep into that here. So yeah, we're sending a request to this endpoint, and then we have to wait a little bit, right? We're going to get a promise from that. We need to wait for it to resolve. We need to wait to actually get that fact back so we can work with it. So we wait and we say then, once that promise resolves, we take the response that we get back, and you can see this is an arrow function, and then we turn that response into JSON. What this line of code does here is it takes the body of the response, it takes the JSON out of that so that we can actually work with the data we want back. Because when we get a response, it's going to have extra information. It's going to have like some headers associated with it, some other information we don't need, but it's going to have a body which has the payload. That's the actual object we want, which is going to look like this, as we saw in the documentation. So in the documentation, it says, here's the format that this response is going to come in. It's going to have a fact, which is going to be a string, and it's going to have a length, which is going to be a number. And you know what this is, right? This is an object, a JavaScript object that we can work with. So we wait to get that response, and then once we get it, we take the body of the response, which is what we actually want to work with. And then once we get that body and get that JSON or get that JavaScript object, we are going to take that data and then we're going to log that data to the console. So that's what that would do. Now, what that would log is something that looks like this, only the string here would be the actual cat fact, and then the length would be however long that cat fact is. So we want to modify that a little bit. We don't want to have, we don't want to work with the whole object. We just want the fact. And you could pause the video and guess how we're going to do that, or I guess just look below. But we can log the actual fact by logging data.fact, right? So it's treating the whole body, which is this, as data, and we can name these whatever we want, but this is just like best practice, right? We can name it response. Like if we wanted to just do R, we could change both of those to R as long as we're consistent. It's essentially a parameter, right? So we can name those whatever we want as long as we refer to them consistently. So yeah, instead of logging the whole data object, we want to log data.fact. That would log it to the console. But we don't want to just log it to the console. We want to set it equal to a storyline variable. So I'm going to go back into storyline into the second slide. As you can see in our variables, we have this cat fact variable here. It's a text variable. It's equal to nothing by default. And then we want to make it so that when we click this generate fact button, it makes that variable equal to the cat fact itself. So here's how we can do that. We're doing the same thing. But now in this last one, we actually get the data we want to work with. I expanded the arrow function a little bit to use some curly brackets just so we can see the code a little bit more clearly that we want to execute. And we're going to do GetPlayer.SetVar cat fact and make it equal to data.fact, because that will take this object, take the fact property here, and make it and grab the value of that thing. So if we grab this code right here and execute it whenever the user clicks this button, like you can see here, then this should work just fine. It should actually generate random cat facts every time we click it. So here we go, generate fact, and there we go. We can click it again, generates another one, click it again, and we could keep going and it will just keep generating these cat facts endlessly. And every time we do this, it's sending a request to this service that some kind soul out here created on the web for anyone to use. And yeah, it's sending a request to them and it's getting back that data that we just looked at and it's setting it equal to a storyline variable. So that's probably the most simple example we could look at for how to use APIs like this. And yeah, if you're making it this far, like congratulations, because it's not, this is complex stuff. And if you're following along, like you know, half the battle's done. You can use AI to get so far nowadays if you understand conceptually what's going on with this stuff. And yeah, it can get a little bit more complex when you add those other options, but I mean, you did it, right? You're bringing in that external data into storyline. So let's move a little further. So let's take a look at try catch blocks. I think I have a slide about that. Okay, so when you're doing operations that may be prone to fail, like making these API calls, you can include your code within a try/catch block to handle errors easier. So all it's saying is we're going to try this thing within these two curly brackets, and then if there are any errors, we're going to catch the error, and this is just a parameter, so we can call it whatever we want as long as we refer to it consistently. Whenever there's an error, it fires an error object, and that object will have different properties. You know what objects are by this point. So in this case, we can see that one of those properties that these error objects have is message. So in this case, in this little example, we're going to do console.log undefined variable, right? We never defined this. It's going to throw an error because this isn't defined. And then this catch block will catch the error. And then we can access that error object in different ways. So as you can see here, console.log, an error occurred, and then we add error.message. Right, we could also rewrite this as a string literal, but yeah, this is kind of how you had to do it before. You have to like make sure you add your spaces within the string, and then you just use the plus sign to concatenate it on. But yeah, I just wanted to show that just in case, you might see this in AI code, especially when working with API calls, because those can fail. Like if you reach an API limit, right? Sometimes your IP address might get limited how many times you can make an API call within a specific amount of time. The server you're making an API call to may be down. You want to know what kind of errors you're dealing with, and you want to be able to, make your code still, you want to be able to have a predictable, you want your code to be functioning predictably when those errors occur. So you would put that kind of code inside of the catch block whenever an error does occur. All right, so we got some, I think this might be your last homework assignment. Yeah, it is, and we're almost through this practice file. So final homework assignment, make an API call to the cat fact generator within a try block, and if an error is caught, log the error's message. So you're gonna kind of combine this try-catch approach with the fetch approach above, which is a very common development pattern in JavaScript. Okay, so if you've been enjoying this so far, if you've been following along, please like the video, show some love, maybe subscribe, because yeah, my throat is so sore at this point, but let's keep going. I've got more for you. So if we want to get a little bit more advanced, I'm going to tease some stuff for you here. So JavaScript libraries are pre-written code collections that other people have written. They're often open source, written by really good developers, and they extend the capabilities of JavaScript. So they solve a lot of common problems that might exist in the base version of the language, and they introduce new development patterns that might save a lot of time overall. And it lets you add functionality to your projects without starting from scratch. So professional developers use these libraries. Don't be like me when I was doing my portfolio project from scratch, and I wrote custom JavaScript to handle all of the different breakpoints. So as the browser window got smaller, it would resize perfectly. There were libraries I could have used that would have saved me so much time, but instead I spent months nitpicking all of my vanilla JavaScript to make it work. You don't have to do that. It's a good learning process, but yeah, there are libraries out there to make your life easier. I'm going to tease a few of these libraries. So Node, React, and Next. Those have been, Next especially, it's blown my mind since I've been learning about that more this year to build some custom web apps, but let's dive into some. So Node lets you run JavaScript on servers and desktops. In the past, you could only run JavaScript in the browser since that's what it was designed for. But once Node.js came along, it let you actually run JavaScript on servers and to create API endpoints using pure JavaScript instead of having to use Python, for example. So if you learn JavaScript now, you can do it on the front end, you can do it on servers, you can write code for whatever you want with JavaScript. And yeah, it powers many modern web applications. It's very popular these days. And you're going to want to use this to make secure API calls because you're going to want to be able to write some server-side programming so that your API keys aren't exposed when we get to that point. Yeah, so this will essentially be a foundation for secure AI integration. React is a library for the front end. So it lets you build these reusable components like reusable buttons, reusable chat interfaces, and so on and so forth. Very popular on the web right now. We're not going to dive too deep into that, but it does look quite different than this vanilla JavaScript we've been exploring. So you might be kind of confused or overwhelmed if you're seeing React for the first time. And then finally, Next.JavaScript is built on top of React. It combines client and server-side code. It's incredible. It lets you have one folder open. Like in Cursor, you can have one code base, and you can have your back-end API endpoints that control the server-side code and your front-end code that you might be executing from Storyline, for example, all in one file. So it's incredible. It's overwhelming if you're getting started with it, but I want to tease it and kind of put you onto it if you are a little bit more advanced and you feel up for learning about what some more modern web devs are using. Yeah, it lets you build complex applications fairly easily. So I'm building an AI chat interface that's kind of trained on all of our content and our approach, and can give you feedback like I would. And I'm building the front end. I'm building the front end and the back end for that with Next.js. So it's pretty great. We'll also be able to use this for some easy, secure AI integration a little bit down the road. Okay, so I've spent probably, I don't know how many hundreds of hours, but maybe 300 or so hours doing some AI development at this point over the past few months, maybe less than that, I don't know, but it's been a lot. Use Claude 3.7. Don't rely on ChatGPT for writing code. I think in a video a couple months ago, I'm like, yeah, the one LLM you need is ChatGPT for coding. That's not true. Use Claude. It's amazing. And yeah, write descriptive prompts about the tools, techniques, approach you're using, and ask for explanations. So the prompt that you use to start off your chat is going to have a really big impact on how well Claude is pointing you in the right direction. So if you say, hey, I'm using, for my use cases, I'm like, hey, I'm using Next.js. I tell it my whole tech stack that I'm using for my app every time I start a new chat, just to make sure it doesn't start recommending something that's a completely different direction than what I'm going for. Yeah, I gave you that sample prompt to get started with like a little simple AI coach that can help you out at the top of the practice file. Screenshots too, amazing. If you ever have errors that pop up in the console, screenshot it and just paste it right into Claude, and it can tell you how to solve it, or it will at least start troubleshooting and helping you solve it. So yeah, screenshots have been like, yeah, having a good way to take screenshots and quickly paste them into your AI assistant, that's probably the best AI workflow tip I can give you, just because how much time it can save. If you don't have an efficient screenshot copying and pasting process, you're working at a disadvantage here. When you are working with the AI, keep in mind, yeah, it can generate some outdated approaches. And I find that only to be true. Like if it's outdated as of the past year, yeah, that's the case. But it's still pretty good with like React, Next.JavaScript, even some advanced features of that. But if it's a really new feature library that's like a few months old, AI is going to have a hard time with it unless you're like pasting in the documentation for that approach yourself, which you can do. That's a tip I should have on here too. If you are using a library or something that AI doesn't seem as experienced with, paste in the documentation, export the documentation print it as a PDF, upload it into AI, and then ask your questions, and Claude will be able to help you out there. It can create security risks if you're doing more advanced stuff and don't understand what's going on, but for anything you'd be doing as a beginner, Claude will be quite good with the security and will let you know about those security risks. Yeah, AI is going to be way more limited on the storyline specifics, so it won't be able to help you out as much on that side. And as long as you understand the basics yourself, you'll be in good shape. And AI can help you learn the basics, right? AI is great as an assistant. It's not a full replacement. It can take you a very long way though, and you can ask for explanations of like what the code is doing, how it's doing it as you go. I've learned more about coding in the past few months than I have in my entire life, just because I have this 24/7 AI assistant who can answer all of my questions in as much depth as I want. So yeah, it's a new world we're living in. I want to give some debugging tips too, just because this can be helpful. Read the error message you get in the console. So you all know how to access the console now when you're running that code. Check out the error message. There's actually even a console in Storyline now that you can access. Whenever you're previewing it, you can go to Inspect, and then you can see your console right here. So yeah, if you ever console.log stuff in your Storyline JavaScript, you'll be able to access it from right within your Storyline file without having to actually publish it out and test it in a browser. When you get error messages that you can't make sense of, paste them into Claude, right? You can screenshot it, you can copy and paste it. It can get you so far, so you're not alone if you're getting errors. It can keep you moving. Add console.log statements throughout your code to like see where the data is at that point. Let me see if I have any examples of how you could do that here. Where is that code? Oh, so like here. Like if we wanted to see what the full data object looked like, we could do like console.log data before we even do this, and then we could test it, and then in the console we'll be able to see the full object that comes back that looks something like this, and then we could say, oh yeah, we need to access that fact property. So then we could do data.fact. So that's really useful when you're working with APIs and you want to see exactly what that data looks like at each point in the process. Just log it. You can add as many console log statements as you want to test things, and that's a very common development practice. And then for complex issues, if you're really stuck, you can comment out entire parts of your code. Again, if I wanted to comment out like this whole part of my code, I would do the slash and the asterisk, and then the asterisk and then a slash, and then this whole section is commented out. So that's another debugging tip for you there. Okay, so it's your turn. So I would suggest trying to complete all the homework assignments in the practice file. You can just do Control F and search for homework and find them all. I think you'd be in, if you made it this far in the video, if you start again, I'm 99% sure you could do at least 80% of them. Some of them might be tricky. I don't know. I did leave some tricky ones in there. Some are easier than others. And I'd love to know how you do, because how you do determines how I did. So if some are particularly tricky, let me know. I'll help share the answer in the comments. If you got them all right, if you got them all working and you feel confident about it, I'd love to know that too, because like I said, put a lot of effort into this video. I'd love to know that I helped some of you out there. If it did help you, best way to let me know probably is by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, right? That helps get it out there too for other people to see, and helps me feel like this big investment in this video was worth it. So yeah, I would really appreciate that if you could return the love, share it with your team if you think they want to dive deeper into the development side. Yeah, and I appreciate you doing that. There are also opportunities to learn more if you want to learn more. So this video is going live in a few, I don't know, maybe like the 11th or 12th or something like that. On the 20th, we're hosting a free live workshop. So I'll be there live. We'll be building some stuff in JavaScript together. You can ask questions live. You'll be able to see my process for building stuff. So you can register with that. Register to that with the link in the comments. And then again, there's more JavaScript stuff coming. Maybe drop a comment letting me know what exactly you want to see next, because there's so many different ways we could take it. I know what I'm most interested in, but yeah, let me know. Subscribe because more content's coming, and drop a comment letting me know what you want to see. Whew, I need to go and drink some tea with honey, or just not talk for the next 24 hours with my throat here. But thank you for making it to the end with me. This video wound up being way longer than I expected, but I really hope that it helped y'all feel confident about JavaScript, write some lines of code, and you're all set up now with your code editor and your AI assistant Claude, and you'll make some cool stuff happen. So let me know how it went. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you in the next video.